So we're going to take a quick last look at our chatbots and take a look at a couple of the actual tools that we've learned, but mainly we're just kind of wrapping things up. So we will do a couple questions as well. So just a little example here to kind of warm up. And we'll kind of notice this gets longer and longer, and we're going to look at some ways to shorten this, or maybe look at it a little bit more of a simpler way because these get so long. So this is just walk through this code and talk about what it does. So we say hello, a little time sleep to put a delay, while the robot thinks about what to say next, right? We've got these lists defined. So one's a pet types and one's pet names. And then obviously we are going to generate a random name here using our random module. And obviously we're taking it from the pet names list and get a random name. And then we ask the user what type would be a good name for a particular kind of pet. So we're going to say for pet in pet types. And remember, this is just a made up variable. Right now, we just invented it in the moment in order to have it be used throughout our for loop. And we're looping through pet types. So we're actually looping through the cat, dog, fish, and horse list, not the other list. So I'm just going to grab a notation here, right? So when we are looping through, right, we're looping through pet types here. Okay. As we go through, then we ask the first part in this loop is what do you want to pick a good name for a pet? And again, that's pet type. So it's going to loop through and say, what's a good name for a cat? Next time would be what's a good name for a dog? And then we get the name from, right? We're getting the name from the user, right? So this line is really complicated. So we're going to think about it, but there's probably some simpler ways we can look at later to make it a little bit easier to read. So we haven't asked the user, so we're asking name equals input. And then we put this line. So we're going to see what that looks like after. But it's saying your suggested pet. Again, pet is, in this case, the first loop would be cat. Your suggested cat name, and then it waits. Right, it's going to wait for the user to enter it. And then, of course, as it captures it, before it assigns it into that variable, it's going to lowercase it completely. It's going to then capitalize, make it a capitalized case, and it's going to strip out the punctuation. So this way capitalizes. This is another built-in function that's it's less common, but we're going to make sure that basically however they typed in the name looks like these names, capital at the beginning, lowercase everywhere else, and without a punctuation, obviously. And then they're going to ask if it's, basically we check to see if it's one of our cool pet names we have up here. So we say, well, if that name is in pet names, anywhere in it, we're going to say, couldn't agree more, that name is great, excellent name for a pet, and that's it. If it doesn't match, right, then we're going to get another random choice from pet names. So we're going to generate another choice from here in order to say, like, whatever their name was, like Computron, really, I think, and then the random name is a better name for whatever the pet was. And so we're really just using this loop as a practice to see and pull from different lists. So like I said, we're looping through this one, but then we're also using to accessing this list for both looking to see if it exists for the agreeing kind of statement, or to pull from in a random way to kind of be able to give that other suggestion again, trying to create the illusion that our robot's, thinking. Okay. So, and again, this is just a clear. So this clear here, that thing you see where it would be like replit.clear. Again, that's just changing the screen between like loops. So we ask about the cat, then we're going to clear it out and say, all right, what do you think is a good name for a dog? Go through that little dialogue. It'll reset at the end by clearing and ask about a pet fish and a pet horse. Okay, so we're going to pause and give you some questions to go for each question, and then we'll take up the answers as you kind of go through. So question 1, what would the following code output? So this bit of text, dot strip, this, dot upper. So what would that print? In question 2, is what does this code output, where we have foods, get some foods in that list, and then what does that print at the end? So we'll ask now both those questions now. Okay, so we'll talk about then what we're actually doing here, or what's going on in this code. So we have this chunk of code, and we're going to call .strip on it, and it's going to look after all these characters and then uppercase it. Now, the thing is about strip, and this is something that is misleading or sometimes confusing, and we probably haven't talked about it enough, is strip's a very specific thing. Strip looks this way and this way, looking for those characters, the ends of the ends of a string, and starts chunking them off. It doesn't do ones in the middle. So that's fine in these cases, because this one, for example, is going to take out the exclamation point. We're going to take out this point here, right? And we're also going to work on this side, and we're going to take out the H. And that leaves us with, this question mark blah part. So that gets us up to here, right? And we've done the strip, and then we say dot upper, which would then, of course, there's no uppercase, and Python knows that, of a question mark, and then it's going to uppercase the entire thing. Now, if there had been a period in here, or an exclamation point or an H, some other character from this group, it would not have been stripped, because it's not being stripped from the left or the right. It's not a remove method. So there is a remove. There's ways of removing things or replacing strings or characters that we haven't looked at yet in strings. So there's specific functions that do that. But this is not that. One of the ways we often do if we're trying to remove a character is we say, like, basically, you can replace. There's a replace function where you'd say, okay, replace all the letter A's with nothing. And that's what it replaces with nothing. So it's basically a removal. But strip is different. It works from the ends, and as soon as it gets to the point where it finds a character where it doesn't belong in here, it just stops the strip, even if the next character after that would be one. Second question is foods equals burger. Here's our list. We want to print. What does this print? And again, this is a weird statement to make. But again, we have to think about the chaining. So again, it's an advanced kind of thing. It doesn't mean this is good code. It just is a good thought exercise for trying to think about what is happening here. So in kind of slow motion, we take tempura and we, are going to dot lower it. So that happens first. So which means we're talking about tempura like this. And then that goes into this dot upper function. And so that would spit out the uppercase of all of them. And then basically what we're actually asking is print tempura in foods. And again, this in thing we talked about, this is similar to a question we already talked about in a previous video. It's a true false question. So again, it's asking print tempura in foods, the statement. So tempura in foods, saying that is really a comparison in some sense. So we're asking, is this true? And we look, nope, it's not there. So this, as a statement that we would print out false. Okay, so we'll talk another two questions. What would the following code output? This one's a little bit different. This question 3 here. So I'm going to show it all at once while we discuss it. But, we're saving variables that hold the same text. I mean, that's kind of a weird thing. But the variable pico holds the word pico, right? So kind of a weirdness, but again, remember that this is the variable name versus the string that it's actually holding. And then we're asking if this is in this list, print hello, else print goodbye. So there's a couple things to think about. So try to think it through step by step. What would this thing print? Okay, so what happens here? Well, these two things is a concatenation. Remember, so plus between two strings is a concatenation. So if you said something like this, remember cat plus dog, and you were printing that, it would print out cat, dog. No space, nothing. And this is what we call something like a string literal, because it's like just the string, it's not in a variable, is maybe a good way of thinking about it. These are variables, but it's still the same thing. They're still strings, right? So Pico and Paco together is basically asking if that thing together is all there. So again, this is what's in that variable. This is what's in this one. So those things together are just this one single word, right? So these things, if we plus them together, they create this. And then you're asking, is this in this? And you're like, well, it's not that, and it's not equal to that, and it's not equal to that. It doesn't look for parts, it's look for the whole thing. So it doesn't matter that part of it's in there, or this part's in there. This isn't a perfect match, right? So the answer is, well, that's not in there. So it doesn't do this, and it's going to print the else. So we're going to print out goodbye as our final, as our only print statement. Okay, so next question. A little bit longer again. So we're going through here, what does this print? This is a little bit different because it's in a for loop, and there's a print statement in there. So intuitively, I think I'm going to have more than one print. Okay. So this for I in print. Now we see this I all the time, and like people love this variable. We haven't talked this a lot, but for you to use an I variable. Now our examples have been things like for letter in Word, right, or for item in A list, and those were way better. Okay, so I often we think of as for index. We've been using, like we computer scientists, so you and I in the lineage and history of computer science, have used I a ton as a variable for representing the things in here. So it's super common for years and years and years. The first time someone learns a for loop in Java or C++ or whatever, where they use I as this variable. Now, that made sense a long time ago, and it made sense from a mathematical sense, and it made sense because you're like, well, this is how we do it. But we certainly generally want our code to be more readable. For simple for loops, having I as a variable is fine. But when you talk about having larger programs, that I might mean something, right? Like here we're just doing a silly example, so these are just words here, essentially words that are words that are numbers, but they don't have no meaning. It would certainly be different if we were talking about for person in this list of people things, or for score in a list of scores, right? So for I, again, use it, fine, but generally for anything that has kind of real meaning in an assignment or something that's we want to be more readable, this shouldn't be I. Like there's no reason for it. It's short, like characters are free, right? Putting the word score isn't really like a big deal. Putting an I in your for loop isn't a flex of like how well you know computer science, or it shouldn't be. So what happens when we print this? So the thing that's new, or the thing that we're thinking about, is a couple things. So take a time to think about what this actually does. So when we do go through it, we're going to print each one of these ones at a time. So remember, I is like, again, I often just write it like a chart, but sometimes we want to think of it like, it's a box with a label on the outside that says I, and we want to know what's inside of it. So the first time when we start, I automatically gets a 0, right? So we'll do the 0. So like I said, usually we write it in a nice chart, not some sort of diagram. So 0 goes in there. So when we print it, again, on the output, it's going to print it like this, a 0. We don't have to call str or turn it to a string. These are already strings. These are not numbers. If you try to do math on these and add them, it won't work. It would concatenate them as strings. So it prints it, and then it will go and print each one in the list, and they will be on a different line. So it is this, and it is not 0, 1, 2 is not this. This is what gets printed. And that's because print statements, by their kind of nature, are print with a carriage return, right? And so like carriage return refers to literally an old school ancient typewriter kind of thing, where, we go to the next line. But it's a new line character, let's say. So every time you print, it forces a new line. Print, forces a new line. It's not, like I said, will not do this. Okay, let's take a look at our next question. So this is a little bit different because we're talking about there being an input, obviously, so we've got to talk about it. So the input to this is going to be I feel good. So just walking through, we say is happy is false, capture this response, do something. If the response is in here, do this thing, else, or whatever's going on here. Okay, so take a think. This one's maybe trickier. So take a moment to really think it through one line at a time and think about what's going to happen. Okay, so looking at this question, we have this is happy is false. Okay. Response, how are you today? Person's going to put in I feel good. So in terms of keeping track of what response is, I would write it up here on piece of paper, response. That's the variable name. What is the value of it? Well, the response is going to become this thing, but lowercase, right? So it's getting this because we said that's what the user's going to type in, and we're lowercasing it right away as it gets loaded or saved in response. So it is I, the lowercase now, feel good. No punctuation, whatever, space is there. Then we say if response, if this is in good, great, or awesome, we're going to print is happy is, we're going to say is happy is true. So is happy is another variable, right? At the beginning, it was false. Now we're asking, is this in here? Well, no, right? It's not. This word is, right? But this one, the whole sentence or statement is not. So is this true? No, like this is not true, so we don't change the variable, and we're going to print is happy. Well, is happy is still false at the beginning, so this was going to print false. Okay, so a couple of coding warm-up activities we're going to take a look at doing real quick, just to kind of practice, like I said, something from free form, and by that I mean is like we're not just dealing with a function where that has a problem and we're not following too many goals, just a little bit general. We have one main goal, but how you implement it. Again, the difference is we want to remember that we still have a class here, and we're going to still have like functions. So we're going to have this New Year's bot that counts down. So it counts down from 10 to 1, then says Happy New Year. We're going to use a loop. So the only requirements here, well, other than counting, is that we're using a loop, and each number should be on a new line. And we already saw that on the other example that's kind of the automatic. But as opposed to like having like print, all of the numbers on one statement and then Happy New Year, we want to say use a loop to practice using a loop. So we've seen this also in some of our other tasks in class, practice using loops. So that should be a bit of a breeze. But remember, we're going to also, at this time, what we're practicing, like I said, is writing that idea of a class. And so we're going to say like, New Year bot or something. And we're going to make up a chat function, right? So still we're making these, like, there's be a self in here, but we're still using these pretty basic one function kind of things for chatbots, and we'll work on more complicated ones. But this is all it needs to be, one function. And of course, if we're doing this in REPL, you would then have to say something like, we'd have to make an instance of the object of this class. So we'd say bot equals nybot. And then for it to start and do this little statement, we would have to say bot.chat. Again, class, right? Above, and then this is our main program where we have to create a bot or create an instance of this thing. And a couple things you can try maybe. So one things for like extras is one is like change the countdown, let's say. And I don't mean change it like, oh, just go in here and change this to 12, but make it an input. So make the start value an input into chat, our chat function. So So right now our chat is just self. It doesn't take in a parameter. We just say chat, nothing. But what we will just say is, as like an extra challenge, is to say, well, what if we were saying bot dot chat, and I don't know, give it 15, something unconventional. And then now 15 is a parameter that this function has to deal with to make it start at 15 and count down to 1. So maybe that's a good challenge to practice some of our for loop skills, and maybe using those range functions. And then we're going to take a look at another challenge. Sorry, I left this part, but basically at the end it's just saying Happy New Year. Okay, so the next one is, I don't know, another silly kind of example, but we're just trying to use some practice using and refresh our conditionals, which we kind of haven't really used a bit. We've been so focused on loops in the last little while. So basically this chatbot's super simple again as well. So a little quick one just to kind of refresh our skills and keep practicing. So ask those questions, I'll decide if you can join the dark side. And then it's going to ask you 2 questions, yes or no. If red is your color, yes. Do you like capes? Yes. And you're in the dark side. But basically, if you like capes or the color red, then you're in. It's got to be, if you say yes to one of those things, apparently that's all you need to be the dark side, on the dark side in Star Wars, then that's what all it's looking for. So it's a yes. So we're going to say that basically they must say yes. So right, these answers are yes, as opposed to, like, you know, yes counts. We want capitals to count. We want yes lowercase to count. We want yes to count, and we want yes because you're super excited about capes and you all capitalize it. Also should count. The only thing that shouldn't count as a yes is anything that's not this, right? So no counts maybe, but so does like and so does no, and so does like, you know, I don't know, like some random junk. All we're saying is if it's this, we're in the dark side. If it's anything else, we're not. Okay? So we don't have to say like else is, did you put a no and worry about stripping that or lowercasing the no. If it's not a yes, you're out, right? Like you hesitate. We also don't want people that can't type the word yes in the dark side either. So it's the only thing you're actually looking for is this in order to do it. And we'll see this in a couple of ways because there's a couple of ways to maybe think about how you capture those inputs and how you set up a conditional to check. And that's it. Those are your 2 tasks to kind of warm up and practice again, building our chatbots and building it something right from the start. So right from a class, define a function, as well as then a main program that, you know, makes an instance of that bot.